Beyond the Clef is presented by Director's Choice.
Welcome to Beyond the Clef. We're at SMSE 2018, and I have the honor to be joined today by Mr. Bobby Floyd, who is the TMEA Executive Director. Thanks for being on the show.
Hey, looking forward to it.
So your convention's busy, I'm sure. You have a lot of meetings.
You know, during the summer meetings, we officially don't play a role in the production, per se, of this convention. But TMEA has a pretty significant presence. We do a lot of training here. We have a lot of
Somehow
meetings.
They keep you busy.
we stay busy. And some of my meetings are with planning for next February, so meeting with convention bureaus and hotels and all of that.
I'm sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about your role of what you do when you go speak to the state, the legislature, and represent TMEA. You represent a lot of people. You represent the future of music in one of the most musical places on the planet Earth. That's got to be a lot on your shoulders. Sometimes does that feel like you're more, I was talking with Dina Menger just a little while ago about this, and she says that you're one of her favorite people on the planet, by the way. So do you feel like your role, we were talking about you being Captain America for music. Do you feel like you're Captain America, or do you feel like you're more Batman in the slums of the bad city? How is that role when you go in to support us and represent us?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I sort of feel like I'm the hired help, you know. I just completed my 25th year at TMEA.
Wow.
And it's been an amazing ride for me, and my learning curve continues to go straight up, just like many of us. Same true in the classroom, too, of course. But I think when you ask most people, who is TMEA and what do they do, say, oh, well, they're a convention in February, and they run the all-state process.
Yeah.
We do a few more things.
Yes.
And certainly advocacy and lobbying for music and for fine arts at the Capitol, the state level, is an important part that started way, I will hasten to add, before I got to TMEA. So everybody says, first words are always out of my mouth. They're always, when they say, oh, thank you for all you do, I say, hey, this started way before I got here, and I get way too much credit for what we accomplish, but it is a labor of love. It's something in a kind of way I enjoy. I do spend quite a bit of my time during the session at the Capitol. TMEA has 2 lobbyists on retainer. They don't just work for us, of course, but they're partners with me at the Capitol, and not only are they experts in lobbying and know their way around the Capitol, they also believe in our passion and our cause and how we serve kids in our classroom. So it's a team effort in many ways, but it is an important part of what we do.
We feel like we're in good hands, of course. So can you give me an example of what you do when you go to session, or maybe an example of something that you've done specifically so that it gives us a better picture of your role?
Through the years, and I've been hanging out over there for 25 years, sometimes we've been aggressive and passed legislation. For example, when the Education Code was rewritten, by the way, the Education Code are all the laws that drive education in the state of Texas. It's written and passed by the legislature. It's 150 representatives and 31 senators. Our legislature, short civics lesson, meets every other year for 140 days. Many of us believe that's too much. When they're not in town, lots of times we think that's the best, but everyone thinks they're an expert at the Capitol on education because they went to school.
Right.
So there are always challenges. Sometimes you are aggressive in moving forward. For example, when the Education Code was rewritten in 1995, the standards for anything but math, science, English, and social studies were simply a guideline. It sent a message to school districts. Well, if the state doesn't believe that there's any concern about rigor in content and what are taught in these subjects, then I guess they're not very important. We certainly don't assess them in STAR. So then there's a tendency to not support those programs, to not fund them, to not staff them the way they need to be staffed, like that. So that one of the most significant pieces of legislation that we've passed has been exactly that, which required standards-based education in all the required curriculum, which includes fine arts. So it helps define the value of the discipline and tell school districts not only do you have to offer it and teach it and require it, that it's got to be rigorous and it's got to be substantive and it's got to be based on our state standards.
Standards-based education, meaning?
So, again, short civics lesson. So the 181 members of the legislature write the laws. Again, 1,600 pages. It's a book about that thick. Then an elected body of 15 called the State Board of Education, they write the rules that school districts follow to carry out the law, if that makes sense. And so they will punt, they'll write something in legislation. It might be sort of broad-based and not clearly defined. Graduation requirements is an example of something the legislature controls, but then sends it to the state board to write the details. So I spend a lot of time working with the State Board of Education. In many ways, they can impact what goes on in our classrooms more than the legislature. So it depends on what the issue is and at what level. When the graduation requirements, the new Foundation High School program was passed by the legislature in 2013, then I spent, and TMEA spent, 4 to 5 months working with the State Board of Education and their working arm called the Texas Education Agency and the Commissioner of Education to write the rules for implementation. And of course, our position was that we wanted to protect at all costs flexibility. We know all our kids in our programs are not necessarily in this case, we have these opportunities for students to choose different pathways. We call them endorsements, one of which is arts and humanities. But the reality is a lot of the kids in our programs, the vast majority of them, are not necessarily going to major in music. And so maybe that's not the right endorsement. Many of them are doing STEM. There's a lot of emphasis on career and technical education endorsements today. We might talk about it if we have a minute. But so we wanted to protect flexibility for kids to be able to pursue an endorsement in STEM, but still have the opportunity to play in the orchestra or the
Absolutely.
band or sing in the choir for 4 years.
Because so many of our kids, and I'm a middle school director, and I tell my kids all the time, my goal is not to make you into a band director or into a professional musician. My goal is to make you a lifelong musician in whatever you're doing. I would be great if they were 60 years old and playing clarinet in a community band and loving music. That's my goal, is making lifelong musicians. So sometimes those endorsements make kids feel like, well, I can't do orchestra because I'm locked in. I have to do my other endorsement.
Yes.
So.
Well, that's exactly right. And we wanted to definitely, again, protect that flexibility so that now in Texas, a student who's pursuing STEM because they're going to go into medicine or engineering or computer programming, they play in the orchestra 4 years or the band or sing in the choir, they're not only going to receive the STEM endorsement, they're going to receive the arts and humanities endorsement, which validates the education, the well-rounded nature of the education they got in high school. So that, in effect, it helps improve their opportunity for acceptance.
So help me understand just a little bit here, since I have you. I need to understand the structure of some of these organizations, okay? So we have the State Board of Education. Who comprises that group, and how do they relate to the legislature, and then how do they relate to me?
Great question. The State Board of Education is an elected body of 15. Now think about that. Think how big the state is. Think how big their areas of the state, their districts that they represent. They get no funding. They get no salary, of course. They have to campaign and 1/15 of the state from a
Doesn't sound like a
population
really
perspective.
wanted job. It doesn't sound like a great job.
I mean, it's
tough.
It's a truly a labor of love, for sure. It's a commitment. Sometimes people run because they want to change things, of course. But by and large, I will tell you that they have been very good to us.
That's great.
Sometimes great things, I've got to say this, great things happen at the Capitol through sheer luck. I mean, I can go in there and spend hours, and our lobbyists, and we can ask our members to write letters and make phone calls and all of that. But some of the key leadership at the state board and at the Capitol have kids involved in the arts. And how do you put a value on that? You know, chairman of Senate Education, kids were involved in choir. Chairman of House Public Education Committee, daughter just graduated from high school, committed choir member as well. Get over to the State Board of Education, the recent past chair. Her son is in LA trying to make it as a starving actor. You know, and the vice chair of the state board, daughter is in New York, musical theater.
Sounds like you know these people very well.
Oh, I know them very well, and believe me, when I find someone like that who's truly passionate and understands our cause and how we serve kids in our classrooms, I mean, how good is that? You know, so they immediately become our allies. And to the contrary, yes, you do run into people over there who don't get it at all, what we do in our classroom. And one other bit of trivia that's interesting, in the 1,600 pages of law that govern education in Texas, the word music does not appear. The word that appears is fine arts. And then the State Board of Education, in their rules, define fine arts as music, art, theater, and dance. And lots of times when I'm at the Capitol and I testify, I also chair another organization called the Texas Coalition for Quality Arts Education. I don't even say, when you identify yourself, you always have to say who you are and who you represent. Sometimes I never even say TMEA. I just say I represent the Texas Coalition for Quality Arts Education. It casts a wider net and touches more people.
Sure.
And again, a bit of trivia at the high school, quite often, when I'm at the Capitol, I spend a lot of my time, not so much with legislators who are very busy during the session, but with their staffs. And in most cases, they're bright, young, in their 20s, kids, I call them, who are really advising in many cases and certainly informing their bosses about what on particular legislation. And I cannot tell you how many times I walk in an office and I go, could I speak to the representative's person in charge of their education policy? And out will walk a 22 or 23-year-old kid and I'll start talking to them about whatever our cause is at the time, and they'll listen and they'll go, well, I was in so-and-so's choir at Permian High School. Oh, I was in the band at LD Bell High School. Oh, well, I was in the orchestra at Westlake. I can't tell you how many times that happens, and that's when you go, yes, thank you, thank you, God.
Well, I see you sometimes in my head. I just envision you a little bit of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington out there at the legislature. Is it that of a romanticized belief of you getting out there and or is it more tame than that when you're actually on the floor and speaking?
A little of both. It gets very tense as you get to the end of a session.
Everybody's trying to get in everything that they need to get into.
And it's interesting. People are not really interested in me talking about civics and government, but if you file a bill and want to pass a bill, there are 48 minimally. There are 48 steps to get it through the system. And if any one of step fails, you're done. You're doomed.
Wow.
It's over.
That's hard.
The first thing you've got to get, if you file a bill and the chair of the House our Senate Education Committees doesn't like your bill, you might as well go home, because they will never give it a hearing. And if that's the first step, once you file a bill, get a sponsor, file a bill. If you don't get a hearing, it's over.
Wow.
So then your only option toward the end of the session is to try to stick it on somebody else's bill.
Wow.
And that's when it becomes a real chess game.
Oh, wow.
Even if you got a hearing in your bill and it's moved through the system and it comes right down to the bitter end, and somehow your bill dies as a standalone bill, then that's when you immediately say, well, you start looking for places to put it. Then you go to the sponsor of that bill and go, hey, can we put this amendment on your bill, and will you be willing to support it? That kind of, it's a chess game in many aspects toward the end. Sort of fun.
Yeah, I bet it's interesting.
Especially when you win.
Yes, of course. Well, you've had a lot of wins for us. I was looking around and trying to learn a little bit more about what you do in the advocacy and the laws, and I found a great document at the TMEA website, and it's I think kind of over on the left, and it's just you wrote an article, and I think it's called Music Education in Law, and it actually references another document that you did, but one of the things you said in that article was that when you get in front of the people you're talking to, whoever that may be, you say Objective 4 of the Texas Education Code states a well-balanced and appropriate curriculum will be provided to all students. And then Chapter 28002 of the same code, each district shall ensure that all children in the district participate actively in a balanced curriculum designed to meet individual needs.
Yes.
That's wordy, but how do you use that as a tool to go on and work with these people?
Well, it's significant, and I quite often, testimony, sometimes you only have 2 minutes, sometimes 3.
Wow.
So you're very limited, and the worst thing you can do is get up there and testify and go over. The other worst thing you can do is if you're asked a question by a member of the committee and you don't know the answer, that you make something up. If you want to doom yourself at the Capitol, you do something like that, you lose your credibility, you might as well pack your bags and go home. Wow. So that's an important sidebar to that. But I do continually remind the legislators of the 2 quotes that you just gave, because those are straight out of the law. And yes, in Texas, we're committed to providing a well-balanced and appropriate education for every child. And the language truly is in Chapter 28, which is the curriculum chapter in the Education Code. And it says, yes, we will provide opportunities for students to pursue their individual passions and meet their individual needs. And that was sort of the whole driving force in 2013 for this new foundation high school program that's anchored in the endorsement plans and giving our kids the opportunity to pursue STEM but still play in the band for 4 years. It's very important. So, and it's easy. Everybody, several hundred bills are filed every session. 8,000 bills are filed.
Wow.
So I think up close to 1,000 in some sessions have been on education. Again, everybody thinks they're an expert because they went to school. And but what they fail to think about, and usually every bill is adding something. Well, kids need character education. They need more government. They need more math. They need more science, whatever it is. But they forget that there's a limited number of instructional minutes in a school day. So you start adding requirements, pardon me, then you have to start taking things out. Well, guess what? Then a principal, an administrator, a superintendent will say, well, let's just cut back on the fine arts. In 3rd grade, well, instead of seeing those kids in music every other day for 45 minutes, let's go to every 6th day. Which sadly, we have elementary music classes where elementary teachers, who, by the way, I believe are the unsung heroes of our profession.
You just had a great interview with Dinah Menger about that particular topic.
Absolutely. And bless their hearts, they're in there trying to deliver standards-based instruction, with 50 kids in the room that they see every sixth day. And so it's a challenge for them. We've tried to address that, and through the years, many years ago, there was a requirement of so many minutes a week for music. Then it went to weekly, and it went away. Because in Texas, we profess to be a state that's anchored philosophically in local control. So the legislature and the state board punt that back to local districts to say, we don't care how big the classes are and beyond the foundation subjects. We don't care how often they meet, but yes, the only thing we can point to is, but you must deliver and cover 100% of the standards in that classroom, and students must demonstrate proficiency. That's in state board rules. So I point to that language all the time. And by the way, for anybody who listens to this that ever needs help on any of these kinds of issues, just call me.
That's great.
Don't say, I can't call Mr. Floyd, he's too busy, because over the years I've assembled a lot of really good arguments in writing.
I'm sure.
Short, concise, but that you can put in front of your principal that they can't argue with.
Well, I'll attest to that. I called you this week, and I was just thinking, again, I'm imagining you're Mr. Smith goes to Washington, you're doing something really important for me, and I called you up, and you answered right away, and you were so nice to talk to, and it was really great. And so if I have, what you're saying is, say I have a problem in my district, and I'm not really sure how the law works with this particular thing, that the policy that they're going through, and I need some phrases, need some help with how I can advocate for my district myself, I should contact you.
And that's a great lead in to advocacy is an important role. I know as a young teacher, all I wanted to do was get in my band hall and teach. I will venture to say I hardly came out of I didn't really make any effort in my early year to get to know the other faculty, to try to help, again, advocate for my program, because so many of your colleagues on your campus, they don't get it either. That's not an indictment of them, but they just don't understand how we serve kids in our classroom. There has never been a time that's more critical than right now for all of us to be advocating for our programs at the local level, on the campus, in the school district, in the community. These are challenging times. I've been here 25 years. I guess I could say that every session, but we have some tough times coming. Not that anybody's purposely going to be out targeting the arts, targeting music, but as we all know, there's an incredible emphasis more than ever before on career and technical education. There's a philosophy that's rampant right now with the changing demographics and socioeconomic makeups of our public schools, that it's sort of a throwback 40 or 50 years that the role of the public school is to train the workforce. Years ago, it was to train a workforce for the factories, but now it's to train regional workforces here in San Antonio, let's say, to work in the Toyota plant, and the skills that kids are going to need, because the reality is a lesser percent, not greater percent of kids in our state, due to shifting demographics and socioeconomics, are not going to go to college. And so I think we all get it, that the last thing we want to do is graduate a kid from high school and then they're just out on the streets and soon they're on welfare. And so it is important that they either go on to college or leave with some kind of skill. But the reality is we don't want to look back down the road and go, in an effort to train a workforce in our public schools to work in these plants, and we take away from that child the opportunity for a well-rounded education, which is what our law says, and the federal legislation, ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, that President Obama signed into law 3 years ago, is anchored in providing every child a well-rounded education. Not only does that legislation include fine arts, to the credit of really NAM, National Association of Music Merchants, who did a lot of lobbying on that, music is separate apart from the other arts, so it says music and arts. So We don't want to deprive students of what they're really entitled to, just to train them in a skill. The other piece of it is when school is, sadly, but this is true, the reality is money's going to be tighter. I don't care what the controller said 2 weeks ago, that, it's a glimmer of hope. We're going to have more money. The legislature is to work with. But bottom line is, in education, it's going to be incredibly tight when they come to town in January. And for every course, as I think most people know, in career and technical education, school districts get extra money, 1.32%. And so are weighted 32% over a regular course. So I've heard superintendents say recently, I will do anything I can to get more money. And if it's counseling kids into a career and technical education pathway to get more money when it might not necessarily be the right thing for that child, it's unfortunate. But it is reality. And the other thing I'll throw on top of that is our new accountability system, A through F accountability system, also rewards school districts for the number of students they have enrolled in participating in a career and technical education certification and a pathway for that. So, and then you throw on top of that school safety, which is a huge issue right now. I've probably listened to 15 or 20 hours of hearings in the last 3 weeks. By the way, anybody that's sick like me and interested in politics, there's so much you can watch on the internet these days and times. I don't have to be at the Capitol all the time. So that's been a great improvement. Not quite so many 2 a.m. mornings.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. You can kind of watch different times.
Yeah, but the new accountability system is something that's demanding a lot of attention, and if school districts see a way to raise their letter grade by enrolling more students in a program like that, then it's going to happen. So there are just lots of, I hate the moving parts word, but there are a lot of things happening right now that are potentially can impact us.
So what can I do, or what can our viewers do to help you?
Well, one thing, a couple of minutes ago I said advocacy is the responsibility of all of us. It needs to start at the local level.
It's not just, I'm going to sit back and let Mr. Floyd take care of it.
Yeah.
He's got it. We have to do stuff too.
And I hear that through other people lots of times. Well, Floyd will take care of that. Don't worry about it.
That's a lot on your shoulders. Yeah.
I need help and my staff needs help. But
so what is it that we can do to help you?
Well, first of all, we have a great one-pager on our website. Let me also say we have a wealth of advocacy information on our website that is helpful. First thing I would say is every teacher needs to go to TMEA.org and go to the advocacy section and look at all the wealth of information and materials that are there. I had an elementary teacher tell me just yesterday in our elementary luncheon that she had just done that. She had all her materials ready to distribute, because it's not just advocating to our administrator or our principal or our school board, the parents. It's critical that parents understand. We're struggling in 6th grade in a lot of districts in terms of kids choosing music as an elective when they get to 6th grade, because there's a multitude of electives where there used to just be 2 or 3 or 4, of which we were always included, band or choir or orchestra, maybe 1 or 2 more things. Now there's 12 and 13 and 14 electives, and it's coding and it's robotics and it's chess.
It's so difficult because I want our kids to be exposed to so many things on my campus,
right.
But and I go into the elementaries and I tell them, if you're going to you have to do a fine art, and you should do it your first year,
right,
because it's the best opportunity to do it.
Yes.
And of course kids don't understand that. Sometimes they're like, I play computer games, I want to do a computer class. I'm like, hey, I do that too, that's totally cool, but please do this first. And the parents don't quite always understand.
Right. No, and parents quite often will be the one that go, oh, you can take coding? Oh, you can take, well, you're going to be an engineer, so don't mess with that music class.
Right.
So that's a challenge.
I found something interesting. Did you know that when computers started and started being the career that some people were going into, that the most sought after degrees, because they didn't have computer engineers, they didn't have computer programmers, the most sought after degrees were musicians.
Yes.
So because you had a logic skill and you had a creative skill, and so those are some of the most sought after at the beginning of all of this. And that's what I tell my kids all the time. When you're going through this program, you want to be a doctor, play the violin.
Yeah, and there's a lot of data, of course, and research supporting all of that.
Absolutely.
And there's some great videos on our website with people like Dan Pink, author of A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future. He's not a musician, he's a lawyer, but he's discovered, and he's a business consultant, international speaker, and we've had him at TMEA before. He's amazing, but he discovered that we're trying to train a workforce for jobs that we don't even know what the jobs are going to be.
Right.
But we do know what the skills are
Yeah.
that people need to have to be successful.
And I always feel like the best skills to have are those that connect with other people, and that's what we're going to need to do, is be able to communicate. What better than sitting in a band class and being able to connect with other people in a skill. Yeah. We know this. I'm preaching to the choir director here.
Well, you are. But back to specifically, what can we do? First of all, put a plan together. Just make a commitment that you're going to do something from an advocacy perspective to support and get the word out about how your programs identify your audience, identify who your allies are, identify who your connectors are, who's can get to the school. Of course, our parents are going to be a big part of that. And then decide what your message wants to be. It can vary from community to community, but figure out what the takeaways would be from your program of all the many things we do for kids in our classrooms. The one that would resonate, a couple that would resonate the most with your community, your superintendent, your principal, and we've just got to be committed to doing this now more than ever. I truly believe that.
Mr. Floyd, it's been an honor to have you on the program. I've learned so much about the law and what you do and what I need to be doing for TMEA and for music in general. Thank you so much. Did you have anything else you would like to just add on to the end here to make sure that people know more about what they need to be doing or what you do?
Just a couple of things.
Sure.
One would be TMEA is philosophically has always believed, and I do personally, that if we're not protected in state law and state rule, it makes it harder for our members and our teachers to fight their battles at the local level. So TMEA will always be committed to continuing this fight. You say, well, the legislature doesn't come back to January. I'm on the computer every day watching a hearing, reading my government newsletters, talking to my lobbyists. So it's an ongoing labor of love and passion, but it really doesn't stop when the legislature is not in town. So, and then again, it's a teamwork thing, and so all things will pass. I don't mean to sound like gloom and doom today. There were over 1.9 million students in a fine arts classroom last year in grades in secondary school, grades 6 through 12. Those enrollments fluctuate a little bit, but we do have challenges out there, but they're all addressable. And the most valuable thing we can have that's hard to cut, hard to not support by a school district or a principal, is a program that's valued by students, by parents, by your administration, by your community. And so the rubber hits the road, as we all know, in the classroom, but we all know it's also a battle we're all committed to, and because the ultimate beneficiaries of it all are our students and our kids. So that's it.
Bobby Floyd, I'm going to call him Captain America of TMEA and music and what we do. Thank you so much for being on the program, and thanks for joining us at Beyond the Clef.